It's about reviewing the special quadrilaterals we've gone over and sort of how they relate to each other, and then being able to determine based on whatever information they give us, how specific can we be, right? So less specific would be quadrilateral. It's a four-sided figure, right? So that's all. If we know it's a quadrilateral, it just means it has four sides. But as we go down in this chart, we get more and more specific. And so notice that anything downstream towards the bottom has all of the characteristics of the ones directly above it, plus whatever new characteristics only it has, right? So quadrilateral, anything with four sides. Now, out of the quadrilateral are a group of quadrilaterals called parallelograms. And so anything that's a parallelogram has all of these characteristics. It has opposite sides that are congruent and parallel, opposite angles that are congruent, so opposite angles would be like that and that. Diagonals bisect each other, so you know if you have any diagonals, that's congruent to that and that's congruent to that. And consecutive angles are supplementary, so like this, angle 1 plus 2, consecutive angles are supplementary. So anything that's a parallelogram has four sides because it's a quadrilateral, plus it has all of these characteristics. Now, going down, there's different types of parallelograms. We have our rectangle and we have our rhombus. And so the rectangle has four right angles, so 1, 2, 3, 4, and its diagonals are congruent. So I know that that and that are congruent. So that's for the rectangle. The rhombus, if it's a rhombus, we know that all four sides right here are congruent. So 1, 2, 3, 4. We know that the diagonals are perpendicular. So if you drew a diagonal on a rhombus, that's perpendicular. And the diagonals are angle bisectors. So we know that that and that is congruent, right? We could say that that and that is congruent. We go right around. So all of these characteristics are specific to a rhombus. So remember, a rhombus has all of the characteristics of a parallelogram, plus these three new additional characteristics. Now the square, notice we didn't write anything additional for a square, because a square is simply the combination of the rectangle characteristics and the rhombus characteristics. So it just has all of them. So a square, by definition, is just a rectangle and a rhombus, but that's as specific as you can get. Quadrilateral is less specific as you can get. Now over here, a trapezoid. Notice a trapezoid is not a parallelogram. It doesn't have two pairs of parallel sides. It just has one pair of parallel sides. So anything with one pair of parallel sides is a trapezoid. More specifically from a trapezoid, you have an isosceles trapezoid, right? So it also has one pair of parallel sides, but it also has base angles that are congruent. So that's congruent to that, and this set of base angles is also congruent, and also the diagonals are congruent. Okay, last, a kite. So a kite is not a trapezoid, it's not a parallelogram, but it is a quadrilateral. The diagonals of a kite are perpendicular, so if we drew these, we could say that that's perpendicular, and we have one pair of opposite angles that are congruent. I'll just change the color here. And so you can tell that in this case, it's this angle and that angle are congruent. The other angles are not. You can tell that this angle on the right is a smaller angle than the angle on the left. Okay, so as we review them, this is how they all relate to each other. And as you go down, you're getting more specific. And the key to remember is that anything downstream has its new characteristics, but still has all the characteristics of anything upstream from it. So here's just a couple other graphic organizers that you can use if you want or not, just to help you sort everything out. So for some of you, the one on the top left is all you need. The one on the top right, on the right sort of gives you just rules about each one, more definitions about their properties. And then the one on the bottom is kind of neat. It shows you how can you separate parallelograms, rectangle, rhombus, square, right? Based on whether or not the diagonals are congruent or whether or not the diagonals are perpendicular. So you can just kind of take a look at that. If any of these are helpful to you, you can just take a screenshot and put that on your computer and use it as you work through the lesson and also the one on the first slide. So a couple really simple problems. What is the most specific name for quadrilateral A, B, C, D? Okay, so there's four sides, quadrilateral. Now, the diagonals bisect each other, right? I can tell that here. They're telling me that this is getting bisected as well as that. So if I go over here on my chart, right? Well, I know that it's a parallelogram. Because I see right here, all parallelogram diagonals bisect each other. But to get any more specific, I would have to know, so for a rectangle, right, I'd have to know that all the angles were 90, and I don't know that. So I can't say it's a rectangle. If I wanted to know it was a rhombus, I'd have to know that all four sides are congruent, but they don't tell me that either, so I can't do that. And don't forget, a square is a rhombus and a rectangle, so if I can't show that it's a rhombus or a rectangle, I definitely can't show it's a square. So the only thing left is a parallelogram. So I know it's a parallelogram because the diagonals bisect each other, but I don't have any additional information to move downstream towards the rectangle, rhombus, or square. So that's it. I can prove that it's a parallelogram and nothing more. So identify the quadrilateral. So is enough information given in the diagram to show the quadrilateral PQRS is an isosceles trapezoid? Explain. Okay, so if it's a trapezoid, we need to have a pair of parallel sides, one pair, right? Okay, so let's look at that. So there's a number of ways we can prove that lines are parallel. One of them is to prove that a pair of consecutive angles is supplementary. And I'm looking at this 74 and 106, and I'm just going to add those up, 74 plus 106, and that is 180. So that means that these angles are supplementary. And if they are supplementary, then the lines that they're connecting are parallel. So I know that PS and QR are parallel because this transversal right here, the consecutive angles in there are supplementary. Okay, so I know that they're parallel, so I know I have a trapezoid. But now, do I have an isosceles trapezoid? Well, we know that if it's an isosceles trapezoid, it has a pair of base angles that are congruent. And sure enough, I can see right here that 74 and 74, I have a pair of congruent base angles. So yes, it's an isosceles trapezoid. So congruent base angles. So yes, we have an isosceles trapezoid. And that's that. So for this lesson, that's all you're going to be doing, right, is determining how specific can you get. Can you say this is just a quadrilateral or a parallelogram, a rectangle, or maybe even a square, right? How specific can you be based on the information you have? And then on the flip side, did they give you enough information to tell whether something is a trapezoid or an isosceles trapezoid or a rhombus or a square or whatever they're asking for?